What if the first city in human history did not disappear beneath the desert, but waited there, breathing under the sand, until someone finally learned how to read its silence? Long before Rome lifted its stone roads across Europe, long before Athens argued about democracy, long before the pyramids became ancient even to ancient people, there was a city in the hot, glittering land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a city of mud brick walls, crowded streets, temple towers, merchants, priests, brewers, scribes, farmers, soldiers, singers, judges, and children who chased goats through alleys while the whole world was still learning what civilization could be. Its name was Uruk, and to those who lived there, it was not ancient, not historic, not a museum word printed under glass. It was simply the center of the world. At sunrise, the city glowed the color of baked bread. The outer walls caught the first light, and the shadows of the great temple platforms stretched across the rooftops like the hands of sleeping gods. Smoke rose from ovens. Donkeys brayed. Water carriers bent under clay jars. Women ground barley into flour with steady stone movements that had begun before dawn. Men walked toward the canals with reed baskets, copper tools, and tired eyes. Priests climbed the temple steps with shaved heads and linen garments. Merchants unlocked storerooms filled with wool, dates, oil, fish, grain, and lapis-colored beads brought from lands most citizens would never see. And in a narrow room near the temple precinct, where the air smelled of clay, dust, and wet reeds, a boy named Enmer pressed his thumb into a tablet and changed his life forever. He was 12 years old, thin as a reed, with dark hair cut unevenly by his mother and eyes too curious for a boy born into a family of canal workers. His father, Lugalesh, had always told him that the rivers were the only writing a poor man needed to understand. "Watch the water," his father said. "When it rises, plant. When it falls, repair the banks. When it breaks the levee, run faster than your neighbor." To Lugalesh, knowledge was practical. Mud under the fingernails, barley in the store jar, fish drying in the sun, and enough beer at night to forget the ache in his back. But Enmer had seen another kind of power, a power that did not shout, did not strike, did not carry a spear. It sat quietly in the hands of scribes. The first time he saw a scribe at work, Enmer thought the man was performing magic. The scribe sat beside the temple granary with a lump of damp clay in one hand and a cut reed stylus in the other. Farmers came forward one by one to deliver sacks of barley ode to the temple household. The scribe did not trust memory. He did not tie knots in cords or mark scratches on wood. He pressed the reed into clay, again and again, making tiny wedge-shaped impressions. Some upright, some angled, some grouped like birds walking through mud. Each mark stood for something: grain, number, name, worker, field, debt, ration, offering. When the clay tablet dried, the record remained. A man could deny words spoken in the marketplace, but he could not easily deny clay sealed with an official mark. That day, Enmer understood something his father had never said. In Uruk, strength built walls, labor dug canals, kings commanded armies, but writing controlled time itself. A spoken promise vanished like breath. A written tablet could outlive the man who made it. The city was alive with records. Tablets counted sheep, jars of oil, measures of barley, teams of workers, temple offerings, beer rations, tax obligations, marriage agreements, land transfers, and the wages of people whose names might otherwise have disappeared forever. Uruk scribes wrote not on paper, because paper had not yet entered their world, nor on parchment, nor in ink. They wrote on clay, the most ordinary substance in Mesopotamia, dug from riverbanks and shaped by hand. With a reed stylus cut from marsh plants, they pressed signs into the soft surface. The marks were wedge-shaped, and thousands of years later scholars would call the system cuneiform, from a Latin word meaning wedge-shaped. But to Enmer, it was not Latin, not archaeology, not a chapter in a textbook. It was the voice of the city made visible. He wanted that voice. His chance came because of a flood. The flood began in the month when the heat usually settled over the land like a bronze lid. For weeks the rivers had behaved strangely. Upstream rains and melting snows, invisible to the people of Uruk, sent more water south than expected. The canals swelled. The banks softened. Farmers argued near the sluice gates. Temple officials demanded more labor. Workers patched weak points with baskets of mud and bundles of reeds. But the water pressed harder every day, patient and heavy. One night, under a moon blurred by dust, the western canal broke. The sound woke half the district. It began as a crack like a jar splitting, then a roar. Water rushed through the breach and spread across the fields, black in the moonlight, carrying mud, reeds, broken fences, baskets, and the bodies of small animals. Men shouted. Women pulled children onto rooftops. Donkeys screamed in their pens. Lugalesh ran toward the canal with other workers, and Enmer followed before his mother could stop him. By dawn, the fields outside the wall had become a shining brown lake. The flood did not destroy Uruk, because Uruk had survived water before, but it ruined many families. Barley flattened. Storehouses near the canal collapsed. Clay tablets stacked too low in one administrative room melted into unreadable lumps. Their signs washed back into silence. 3 scribes from the temple spent the morning trying to rescue baskets of records, cursing like soldiers as they carried wet tablets into the sun. Enmer helped them without being asked. He was small, quick, and careful, while stronger boys hauled mud. He lifted tablets one by one and placed them on reed mats. Some were still readable, others were scarred. One had cracked in half, and Enmer, not knowing better, held the pieces together and tried to match the signs. A shadow fell over him. "Can you read that?" asked a voice. Enmer looked up and saw an old scribe with a narrow face, a gray beard, and eyes sharp enough to cut rope. His name was Nanaili, though many boys whispered that he had been born before the city walls were finished. He served the temple household of Inanna, the great goddess whose presence ruled Uruk's sacred center. Nanaili was not impressed by strength, beauty, excuses, or noble birth. He respected only accuracy. "No," Enmer admitted. "Then why are you staring at it as though it owes you money?" "Because the signs look like they almost speak." The old man studied him. "Signs do not almost speak. They speak, or the reader is deaf." Enmer should have lowered his eyes. Instead, he said, "Then teach me to hear." That was the first astonishing turn in Enmer's life. The old scribe did not laugh. 2 weeks later, Enmer entered the tablet house. The tablet house was called the Adubba, the place where boys became scribes and scribes became valuable enough to be fed by institutions larger than their families. It was not a school in the modern American sense, not a cheerful place with bright posters and kind teachers praising effort. It was disciplined, repetitive, and sometimes harsh. Students copied signs until their hands cramped. They learned lists of words: trees, stones, animals, professions, cities, gods, numbers, measures, vessels, fields, metals, and stars. They copied model tablets prepared by advanced students. They learned Sumerian words and the conventions of administration. They practiced making tablets, smoothing surfaces, holding the stylus at the correct angle, and pressing wedges deep enough to last but not so deep that the clay split. The sons of officials mocked Enmer at first. His tunic was rough. His hands were scarred from canal work. He smelled of mud no matter how often his mother scrubbed him. One boy named Demuziuar, whose father oversaw temple livestock, leaned close on the first day and whispered, "The canal has sent us a frog." Enmer said nothing. He had already learned from his father that mud could swallow careless feet. The lessons were brutal in their simplicity. At dawn, the master gave each student a tablet with a column of signs. The student copied it. The master checked it. Mistakes were scraped away if the clay was still wet. If the tablet had dried, the mistake remained like shame. Enmer learned that writing was physical. Every sign required pressure, angle, rhythm. A careless wedge changed meaning. A missing number could steal grain from one man and give it to another. A wrongly written name could erase a worker from the ration list. In a city of thousands, writing was not decoration. It was survival. Uruk itself became his second tablet. He read the city as he walked through it. He saw how the canals were not just water channels but arteries of power. The rivers brought silt that fed the fields, but the rivers were unpredictable, so humans carved order into the land. Canals carried water to barley fields, date groves, gardens, and reed marshes. They allowed boats to move goods. They demanded constant maintenance. A canal neglected for one season could choke with silt. A levee ignored for 1 week could fail and ruin harvests. That was why labor had to be organized, counted, assigned, and recorded. Civilization did not begin only because people dreamed of temples and kings. It began because someone had to know how many workers owed how many days to repair which canal before the river destroyed everything. He saw the temple economy from inside its clay records. The temple was not merely a place of prayer. It owned fields, managed herds, employed weavers, bakers, brewers, fishermen, guards, gardeners, and scribes. It received offerings and distributed rations. It stored grain and wool. It sponsored festivals. It represented divine authority in earthly form. To a modern American audience, the closest comparison might be a city hall, a bank, a warehouse, a church, a courthouse, and a corporate headquarters fused into one sacred institution. Except no comparison truly fits because Uruk belonged to a world where gods were not private beliefs. They were public powers. Above all stood Inanna, goddess of love, war, power, desire, and terrifying transformation. Her temple precinct dominated the imagination of the city. Her festivals filled the streets. Her priests and priestesses handled rituals meant to keep divine favor flowing. Inanna was not gentle in the way later ages sometimes imagined goddesses to be gentle. She was radiant, ambitious, dangerous, and alive with contradiction. Men prayed to her before battle. Women prayed to her in matters of fertility and household strength. Kings sought legitimacy through her favor. Poets would one day sing of her descent into the underworld, where she passed through 7 gates and was stripped of her powers one by one. But in Enmer's childhood, she was not a myth from a library. She was the force behind the city's heartbeat. The king of Uruk, whom people called the An or Lugal depending on office and tradition, ruled with power that seemed both human and more than human. He appeared during ceremonies wearing fine garments and symbols of authority. He judged disputes, directed labor, led armies, sponsored building projects, and stood close to the gods in ritual life. Some whispered that kingship had descended from heaven. Others cared less about heaven than about whether the king's men collected too much grain. In Uruk, politics lived in the space between divine order and human hunger. Enmer learned this through a case involving a widow, 3 sheep, and a tablet. The widow's name was Amasig. Her husband had died while hauling reeds for a temple construction project. According to the ration records, his household was still owed barley and oil for 6 days of labor. But the official responsible for distribution claimed the man had already been paid. Amasig came to the administrative courtyard with her 2 children and a face hardened by grief. No one listened until she produced a small tablet. It was ugly, uneven, and written by a junior scribe, but it bore the marks clearly enough. The dead man's name, the work assignment, the unpaid ration amount, and the seal impression of a supervisor. Nanili read it aloud. The official's expression changed. Clay spoke. Amasig received the grain. That evening, Enmer could not sleep. He kept thinking of the widow walking home with her ration. Not because a powerful man had pitted her, but because signs pressed into mud had carried truth across time. He began to understand that writing could serve power, but it could also challenge power, if the tablet survived and the reader was honest. Years passed. Enmer's hand grew steady. His signs became clean, elegant, and compact. He learned numbers well enough to catch errors in grain accounts. He learned to recognize seals by their impressions. Cylinder seals rolled across clay to leave miniature scenes of gods, animals, heroes, banquets, or symbols of office. A seal was identity, authority, and art combined. Wealthy men wore them or kept them close. When rolled across a tablet or clay ceiling, they said, "This record is approved, this jar is closed, this door was sealed, this transaction happened." He also learned that writing had memory but not mercy. A tablet could preserve a debt longer than a man could bear it. It could bind a family to obligation. It could make taxes more efficient and excuses less possible. Some people feared scribes because scribes made the invisible visible. Grain in a storehouse could be counted. Workers could be listed. Fields could be measured. Promises could be fixed. A ruler with scribes could reach farther than a ruler with shouting messengers alone. One summer, when Enmer was about 18, a caravan arrived from the east with stones the color of night sky and mountains. Lapis lazuli, carnelian, timber, copper, and strange shells moved through Mesopotamian trade networks from distant places. Anatolia, Iran, the Gulf, perhaps even lands beyond where Enmer's imagination could travel. Uruk itself sat in southern Mesopotamia, a land poor in stone, metal, and timber but rich in clay, reeds, dates, barley, and human organization. Because the land lacked many raw materials, trade became essential. Merchants moved goods by boat, donkey, and human endurance. They carried not just objects but stories, languages, rumors, diseases, songs, and ideas. A merchant named Shubur came to the temple office to settle an account. He wore a beard braided with oil and had the confident smile of a man who had lied successfully in 5 cities. He claimed that 3 bundles of imported cedar had been damaged before delivery and therefore should not be counted at full value. The warehouse manager disagreed. Voices rose. Witnesses contradicted one another. Finally, Nanieli called for the sealed tablet made when the shipment entered the city. The tablet showed the original count, quality marks, and seal impressions from both parties. But Enmer noticed something odd. One seal impression was shallow at the edge, as though the clay had been softened and pressed again after drying. He asked to examine it. The courtyard quieted. Nanieli's eyes narrowed. "Speak carefully." Enmer held the tablet near the light. The surface around the number sign had been scraped. Someone had altered the record. Shubur laughed too loudly. A canal boy sees ghosts in clay. But Enmer had spent years learning how clay behaved. Fresh clay took impressions differently from re-wetted clay. A scraped surface never matched perfectly. The number had been changed. The investigation lasted 3 days. A junior warehouse assistant confessed after a temple guard found a damp scrap of practiced clay hidden behind storage jars. Shubur had bribed him to alter the count. The penalty was severe: repayment, public disgrace, loss of trading privileges for a season, and for the assistant, forced labor on canal repair. That was the second astonishing turn in Enmer's life. He realized that writing did not merely record civilization. It created new kinds of crime. Before writing, a liar needed only a bold tongue. After writing, a liar needed technical skill. By the time Enmer became a full scribe, Uruk had grown beyond anything his grandfather could have imagined. Its population was vast for the age, perhaps tens of thousands, a true urban organism in a world still largely made of villages. Its streets twisted between mud-brick houses where families slept on roofs in hot weather and stored goods in cool interior rooms. Dogs nosed through refuse. Potters shaped bowls by the hundreds. Brewers made beer thick with grain, safer than river water and central to diet and wages. Weavers, many of them women working under institutional supervision, turned wool into textiles that could be rationed, traded, or stored. Fishermen brought catches from canals and marshes. Farmers outside the walls produced barley, the backbone of the economy. Date palms offered sweetness, shade, and fiber. Reeds became mats, baskets, boats, roofs, and styluses. Clay became walls, jars, ovens, tablets, and history. The city smelled of everything at once: baking bread, animal dung, river mud, sesame oil, sweat, fish, beer mash, smoke, wet clay, and incense. It was noisy in ways modern people might recognize. Bargaining, construction, arguments, songs, crying babies, carts, animals, and officials insisting that someone had misunderstood a rule. Uruk was ancient, but its people were not simple. They worried about wages, status, food prices, family honor, bad neighbors, corrupt officials, lazy sons, unreliable workers, and whether the gods were angry. They laughed at jokes now lost forever. They fell in love. They cheated. They prayed. They got bored during long ceremonies. They feared death. They wanted their names remembered. And names mattered deeply. One afternoon, Nanieli gave Enmer a tablet unlike the others. It was not an account, not a receipt, not a ration list. It was a literary text, a hymn praising a king and the goddess. The signs were more complex, the language elevated. Enmer read slowly, stumbling over phrases that seemed to rise above ordinary speech. Here writing was no longer just administration. It was beauty, carried rhythm, devotion, memory, and imagination. A city that began by counting grain had begun to write the human soul. "Remember this," Nanniali said. "The first use of writing may be to count what can be owned, but its greatest use is to preserve what cannot be held." That sentence stayed with Enmer for the rest of his life. When war came, it came not like a story but like a shortage. First there were rumors. A rival city upstream had seized boats. Border fields had been raided. A temple messenger had not returned. Then came orders. More barley for soldiers, more wool for garments, more labor for walls, more copper tools redirected from farmers to weapon makers. The city tightened. Men who had argued over beer now argued over spear points. The king's officials demanded lists of able-bodied workers. Enmer wrote names until his wrist burned. War in early Mesopotamia was not always the clash of giant empires later ages would imagine. It could be a struggle over water rights, fields, trade routes, prestige, temple wealth, or the ambition of rulers whose cities stood too close to share the same river peacefully. In a land where irrigation meant survival, control of canals could mean control of life. A city did not need to burn another city completely to defeat it. It could redirect water, damage fields, seize harvests, or capture laborers. One evening, Enmer's younger brother, Aba, appeared in the tablet house wearing a soldier's belt. He had inherited their father's shoulders and their mother's stubborn mouth. "They listed me," he said. "I know," Enmer replied. He had written the list. Aba smiled without humor. "Then make a mistake. Lose my name." Enmer looked at him. For one terrible moment he saw how easy it would be. A smear, a missing sign, a tablet placed in the wrong basket. Writing controlled reality inside the offices of Uruk. A man absent from a list might be absent from duty, but another man would go in his place. Some other brother, some other son. "I can't," Enmer said. Aba's smile vanished. "Then your clay is stronger than blood." He left before Enmer could answer. The army marched 3 days later. Women wailed at the gate. Priests performed rituals. The king's banner moved like a flame above the crowd. Enmer stood with other scribes, recording issued rations, weapons, and personnel. He hated every sign he made. For the first time, writing felt like a chain. Weeks passed, then months. News returned in fragments. A skirmish won. Canal seized. A field burned. Prisoners taken. Aba did not return with the first group, nor with the second. His mother stopped asking directly and began asking about other families' sons, as though information might circle back politely if not confronted. Then a tablet arrived from a military camp. It listed the dead. Enmer read the names in a room full of officials. Halfway down the second column he saw Aba. The signs were clear. He did not cry until night. He took a scrap of clay and wrote his brother's name again and again. Not for the temple, not for the king, not for rations or taxes or war, but because a name pressed into clay was the only small resistance he had against disappearance. The tablet was never fired in a kiln. It dried in the heat and remained with him, wrapped in cloth. After Aba's death, Enmer changed. He became quieter, more precise, less impressed by officials. Nanniali, older now and sometimes short of breath, trusted him with more complex work. Land disputes, marriage contracts, adoption records, legal settlements, temple inventories, diplomatic messages. He saw how Sumerian city culture depended on agreements, and how agreements depended on witnesses, seals, and memory. Families arranged marriages with gifts and obligations carefully recorded. Land boundaries were described in relation to canals, fields, trees, and neighboring plots. Debts could carry interest. Workers received rations according to status, gender, task, and institution. Society was unequal but not chaotic. It had categories, ranks, expectations, loopholes, and arguments, always arguments. One case involved a woman named Ninhidu, a brewer whose beer was famous across 2 districts. Beer in Sumer was not a luxury for the idle. It was food, drink, payment, ritual offering, and social glue. It was made from barley, often thick, sometimes drunk through straws to avoid sediment. Ninhidu supplied beer to temple workers, but an overseer claimed her jars were short. She arrived furious, carrying her own marked measuring vessel and demanding a public test. Enmer supervised the measurements. The overseer was wrong, or lying. Ninhidu leaned toward him afterward and said, "A good scribe saves more beer than a good brewer. That may be the highest praise I ever receive," Enmer said. She laughed, and for the first time in many months he did too. Their friendship became courtship in the sideways manner of busy adults in a crowded city. She sent beer to the tablet house for the old master, though Nanieli drank little and noticed everything. Enmer wrote a clean contract for her cousin without charging the usual favor. She mocked his inkless profession by saying he spent all day stabbing mud. He replied that she spent all day drowning barley. Eventually their families negotiated. Gifts were exchanged. Obligations were recorded. Witnesses sealed the tablet. Enmer married Ninhidu in the season when dates ripened. Their house was small, near a lane where potters worked. At night, they lay on the roof under stars so bright that the sky seemed written with its own cuneiform. Ninhidu knew business better than many officials. She tracked barley supplies, workers, jar counts, and customers in her head, though she could not formally write. Enmer began teaching her signs in secret, not because women never participated in written culture. Some did, especially in elite or temple contexts, but because the tablet house remained dominated by men and institutional rules. Ninhidu learned quickly. She liked numbers best because numbers exposed fools. "Your signs are ugly," Enmer told her once. "My beer is beautiful," she answered. "No one drinks your tablets." They had a daughter, whom they named Shala after a grain goddess, and a son, Abiaili, named for Enmer's lost brother. Parenthood taught Enmer that civilization was not only temples, kings, writing, and walls. It was also fever at midnight, a child's first steps across a packed earth floor, lullabies older than memory, and the terror of loving someone in a city where disease, flood, war, and hunger could enter without knocking. As Enmer aged, Uruk continued to change. New rulers rose. Old officials died. Temples were repaired, expanded, renamed, or rededicated. The writing system itself evolved. The earliest signs had begun as pictographs, little images representing objects, but over generations they became more abstract, rotated, standardized, and wedge-shaped. Cuneiform was not one language. It became a writing technology used for Sumerian and later Akkadian and other languages across the Near East. Enmer did not know this future, of course. He did not know that long after Sumerian stopped being spoken as an everyday language, scribes would still study it like a classical language of learning. He did not know that clay tablets, unlike papyrus or leather, could survive fire and burial so well that people thousands of years later would recover them from ruins and hear voices from his world. He only knew that signs changed because living hands changed them. When Nanieli died, the tablet house felt briefly impossible. The old scribe had arranged his own affairs with typical severity. His funeral offerings were listed. His few possessions were assigned. His students copied a model text in his honor. Enmer inherited his stylus case, a simple reed container polished by years of use. Inside was one unfinished tablet. On it, Nanieli had written a proverb: "A scribe whose hand moves without truth is a thief with clean fingers." Enmer kept it beside his brother's name tablet. The most astonishing event of Enmer's life came not from war, flood, or royal command, but from a sealed room beneath a temple storehouse. The room was discovered during repairs after a wall slump. Workers removed damaged bricks and found an older doorway filled in generations earlier. Inside were jars, broken baskets, and tablets stacked in clay bins. Some had cracked. Some were covered in dust and bat droppings, but many were intact. The room was an archive, forgotten not by destruction but by bureaucracy, which is perhaps the most human kind of burial. Enmer was called to inspect it. The tablets were older than his master's master. Their signs were unfamiliar, more pictorial, less standardized. Many were economic records, but a few contained word lists and ritual notes. One tablet showed fields assigned to workers whose names had not been spoken in a century. Another recorded offerings to a temple title no longer used. Another contained a dispute over canal access between families whose descendants might still be arguing without knowing why. As Enmer held those tablets, he felt something he could barely explain. The dead had not vanished. They had been waiting in clay. He imagined a man like himself pressing signs into a tablet under lamplight, irritated by noise, worried about grain, unaware that centuries later another scribe would hold his work and feel the warmth of his vanished hand. Suddenly Enmer understood that every tablet was a bridge thrown into darkness. Most bridges collapsed. Some reached the other side. He became obsessed with preservation. He ordered damaged tablets copied. He trained students to identify older signs. He argued with officials who wanted to discard useless records. Useless to whom? A ration list might be useless to a hungry man today, but to the future it could reveal how a city fed its workers, how women labored, how institutions grew, how power counted bodies and grain. He did not think in modern historical terms, but he felt the sacredness of record. A city without memory was only noise. His daughter Shala inherited his hunger for signs. From childhood she watched him shape clay. Unlike her brother, who preferred boats, trade, and the loud freedom of markets, Shala noticed details. She could identify a seal impression before she could grind barley properly. She asked why signs looked different on older tablets. She asked why gods needed offerings if they were powerful. She asked why men wrote contracts about women but women were not always invited to read them. Ninhidu encouraged every dangerous question. Enmer faced a choice. The tablet house would not easily accept Shala. But he had learned from clay that rules were human even when stamped with divine language. Quietly at home he taught her. Shala's signs were cleaner than his had been at her age. She learned numbers fast. She loved lexical lists, especially animals and stars. She laughed at the sign for donkey because she said it looked as stubborn as the beast itself. By 15, she could copy administrative tablets accurately. By 16, she could read older forms that confused some junior scribes. Enmer began giving her broken tablets to reconstruct as puzzles. One evening, she found something strange in a copied ritual text from the hidden archive. A sequence of signs appeared to reference not only offerings but a journey, a descent, a stripping away of powers at gates. Enmer recognized themes associated with Inanna, but the version was different from the hymns he knew. "This is old," Shala whispered. "Or badly copied," Enmer said. "Old things can be badly copied. That does not make them empty." He smiled. "You sound like Nana Eli." Then he must have been right often. Together, father and daughter worked through the text over many nights. It was fragmentary, perhaps an early version of a myth, perhaps a ritual drama, perhaps both. In it, the goddess descended from the bright world into the land of no return, passing gates where pieces of her authority were removed. Crown, beads, breast ornaments, rod, garment. What returned was not what had entered. The story was terrifying and beautiful. It spoke of power losing itself, death confronting desire, and return purchased through substitution. Enmer did not fully understand it. That was why it mattered. Some tablets were not doors to answers. They were doors to deeper rooms. Shala asked, "Why would a goddess go down?" Enmer looked toward the dark city beyond the roof. Perhaps even gods must learn what is beneath them. Years later, when Enmer was old and his hands ached in cold months, Uruk endured another crisis. Not a flood this time, but drought. The rivers ran low. Canals shrank. Fields cracked. Grain stores became political weapons. Officials tightened ration distribution. People muttered that the gods had turned their faces away. The poor suffered first, as they always do when a city's abundance becomes a memory. A governor's office issued new ration lists that reduced portions for certain labor groups while protecting higher officials and temple dependents of rank. The changes were legal in the sense that power had authorized them, but cruel in the way hunger understands cruelty. Workers protested near the granary. Guards pushed them back. Someone threw a stone. Someone bled. A group of laborers came to Enmer's house at night. Among them was the grandson of Amasig, the widow whose tablet had once secured her ration. They carried old records showing customary allocations during previous shortages. They wanted Enmer to help them petition. He was old enough to know the danger. Scribes who challenged policy could lose position, protection, even freedom. Ninhidu, gray-haired but still sharp, listened from the doorway. "Clay can speak," the laborer said, "but only if someone reads it aloud." Enmer thought of his brother, his master, the altered cedar tablet, the forgotten archive, the proverb, "A thief with clean fingers." He wrote the petition. It did not accuse the governor of theft. That would have been foolish and possibly fatal. Instead, it cited precedent, named past ration adjustments, listed worker categories, calculated expected productivity losses from underfeeding canal laborers, and framed the appeal as protection of the city and service to the gods. It was truthful, strategic, and difficult to dismiss. Shala helped prepare copies. Ninhidu supplied beer to the workers gathering witnesses. The petition moved through offices slowly. Officials resented it. Some mocked it, but the calculations were sound. If canal workers weakened, canal maintenance would fail. If canals failed, next year's harvest would shrink further. If harvest shrank, temple stores and royal power would suffer. Compassion alone might have been ignored. Administrative logic could not be. The ration cuts were partly reversed. No songs were sung for Enmer. No king praised him. No statue bore his name. But in several districts, workers received enough barley to keep digging. That winter, Enmer became ill. He knew before others admitted it. His breath shortened. His appetite faded. His hands, once steady enough to press tiny signs into clay, trembled. Shala sat beside him with tablets, reading aloud to keep him anchored. Ninhidu brewed thin beer and cursed death as though it were a dishonest customer. On his last clear day, Enmer asked for wet clay. Shala placed a small tablet in his hands and guided his fingers around the stylus. "What do you want to write?" He thought for a long time. Not an account. Not a contract. Not a hymn copied from another hand. Something true enough to cross darkness. Slowly, painfully, he pressed the signs. "I was Enmer, son of Lugalesh, worker of canals, student of Nanaili, husband of Ninhidu, father of Shala and Abieli. I wrote what I saw. Let the reader be honest." The tablet was small. The signs were uneven. But Shala dried it carefully and later placed it with his brother's name tablet and Nanaili's proverb. Uruk went on. That is the part modern people often forget. Ancient cities did not exist merely to rise and fall for our dramatic satisfaction. They went on through ordinary mornings. Bread still baked. Children still cried. Merchants still cheated when possible. Priests still climbed temple steps. Farmers still cursed canals. Scribes still corrected students. Lovers still met in shadows. The city changed names, rulers, languages, gods, and empires. Sumerian culture influenced Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and later civilizations in ways no single person could have predicted. Cuneiform spread across centuries, carrying laws, myths, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, diplomacy, school exercises, royal boasts, prayers, jokes, and complaints. Clay tablets recorded the epic traditions that would eventually include Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, whose grief over death still feels painfully modern. They preserved flood stories, legal codes, omen texts, hymns, and the daily paperwork of lives that would otherwise be dust without names. And then, after ages of heat, conquest, neglect, and burial, the city slept beneath the earth. The walls eroded into mounds. The canals shifted or vanished. The gods lost their temples. Languages changed. Empires rose over the bones of older empires. People forgot how to read the wedges. For almost 2,000 years, cuneiform signs sat silent, mistaken by some for decoration or meaningless scratches. The tablets had survived, but their voices were locked. Then modern scholars began to unlock them. Imagine the astonishment of that moment. A person in the 19th century staring at wedge marks pressed by hands dead for 4,000 or 5,000 years and realizing they were not random. They were records. Words, names, receipts, myths, schoolwork, legal disputes, human presence. The silence cracked open. The first cities spoke again. Somewhere in the recovered ruins of Mesopotamia, among countless tablets broken, burned, buried, scattered, catalogued, translated, and stored in museums, one can almost imagine a small tablet made by an old scribe with trembling hands. Perhaps it never survived. Perhaps it dissolved in a flood or shattered under a collapsing wall. Perhaps no archaeologist ever found it. But the miracle of Sumer is that so many other tablets did survive that Enmer's world is not entirely lost. We know the shape of his city's concerns because people like him wrote them down. We know that workers received beer and barley. We know that temples managed enormous resources. We know that students copied word lists. We know that seals marked authority. We know that kings sought glory. We know that women brewed, wove, traded, lamented, negotiated, and endured. We know that law, labor, religion, economy, and literature were already intertwined at the dawn of urban life. Uruk was not primitive. It was early, which is different. It was humanity experimenting with scale. More people, more food, more labor, more inequality, more cooperation, more conflict, more memory. The city asked questions we still ask in America and everywhere else today. Who controls resources? Who records truth? Who benefits from the system? Who is counted and who is left out? Can technology make society fairer or only more efficient? Does writing protect the weak or strengthen the powerful? What do we owe the dead? What will survive us? Every receipt in Uruk was a tiny act of civilization. Every ration list was a map of power. Every school tablet was a rehearsal for bureaucracy and literature. Every myth pressed into clay was a refusal to let wonder vanish. And every wedge-shaped sign carried the same astonishing message across time. We were here, we worked, we loved, we feared, we counted, we prayed, we argued, we remembered. Long before the United States, long before English, long before paper money, smartphones, skyscrapers, highways, and digital clouds, a boy in a mud-brick city watched a reed stylus press into clay and understood that a mark could outlive a voice. That may be the most astonishing invention of all. Not the wheel, not the wall, not the canal, not the temple tower rising toward the burning sky, but the decision to make memory visible. Because once memory could be stored outside the human body, civilization became something more than survival. It became a conversation with the future. And if you listen closely, beneath the noise of the modern world, beneath the glass towers and traffic and glowing screens, you can still hear Uruk whispering through its broken tablets. It does not whisper like a ghost. It whispers like a city that knows we are not so different from the people who once walked its streets. We still build higher than we need to. We still count what we fear losing. We still trust records when memory fails. We still argue over water, labor, debt, power, and truth. We still hope that somewhere, somehow, what we write will remain. In the end, the city of Uruk did not need to survive unchanged to become immortal. Its bricks returned to dust. Its canals faded. Its kings became legends. Its gods moved into museums and books. But its clay endured. And in that clay, the first urban people left fingerprints beside their words. That is why the story of Sumer is not only the story of the past. It is the story of the first time humanity looked at the chaos of life. Grain, floods, gods, hunger, trade, death, love, ambition, and pressed order into wet earth. And the earth remembered.